I came home to find 100 strangers cannonballing into my pool like it was a theme park. Beer cans floated lazily in the water, greasy fingerprints smeared my glass patio door, and someone had dragged a full-sized grill onto my deck, flipping ribs, like this was their backyard. A group of moms lounged under my umbrella, sipping wine as if they owned the place. Kids screamed, splashed, and ran around barefoot on my expensive tile. Then, as if the universe wanted to see if I could take any more, the HOA president Evelyn Durs stood at the edge of my pool, megaphone in hand, announcing to the crowd, "Welcome to your new community pool." For a moment, I thought I had suffered a heatstroke-induced hallucination. My brain struggled to comprehend what I was looking at. It had to be a prank. Right then I noticed my locked side gate wide open, its hinges, twisted, a laminated sign taped to my back fence read "Community Pool. Open access by HOA mandate." I clenched my jaw so hard my mullers might have cracked. My feet carried me forward. Before my brain fully processed what I was about to do, I stepped over a half-eaten burger someone had abandoned on the ground, and walked right up to Evelyn, who hadn't even noticed me yet. "Oh, what a turnout!" She beamed at a man next to her, handing him a paper cup of lemonade. "This will really boost property values." "What the hell is this?" I cut in, my voice dangerously low. Evelyn turned, blinking in mock surprise, as if I was some random party guest and not the owner of the property she had just invaded. "Oh, Jake, so glad you could join us. The HLA board voted to classify your pool as a community amenity based on a bylaw from 1986. She smiled, utterly unfazed. "We sent a letter, but I assume it got lost in the mail." I could feel the veins in my neck pulsing. "You didn't send a letter?" "Well, it was in the monthly newsletter, page 4 in the bottom corner," she said with a casual wave of her hand. "We're all so excited to have this new gathering place. Just think of the community bonding." I looked around at the scene of absolute destruction. Someone had dragged my expensive lounge chair into the pool. A toddler who clearly had no regard for bathroom etiquette was standing suspiciously still in the shallow end. My outdoor speaker system blared pop music at full volume. My jaw tightened. "Evelyn, you had no right to do this," I said, voice level, but there was an edge to it now. "This is private property. My pool. My home." Evelyn's smile didn't waver. If anything, it grew smugger. "Oh, Jake, when you bought this house you agreed to the HOA's authority? You should have read the fine print." Oh, I had read the fine print. I had read it very carefully because, unlike Evelyn, who enjoyed bullying her way through neighborhood decisions, I had an ace up my sleeve that she had no idea about. The problem was I had come home expecting a quiet evening, not an act of war. I needed to get my bearings before I launched a counterattack. I exhaled slowly, then without another word, walked straight to my patio control panel. Evelyn barely registered what I was doing as she turned back to schmo with another homeowner. I pressed a button. Instantly, the pool's filtration system shut down. Within seconds, the water turned from crystal clear to a murky green. The partygoers noticed. Immediately, people wrinkled their noses. Some started climbing out, looking disgusted. One guy lifted his arms out of the water, staring in horror as his skin had taken on a slightly slimy texture. "What's happening?" someone yelped. I leaned casually against the fence, arms crossed. "Oh, that's just what happens when an unsanctioned high bacteria level event occurs in a privately maintained water source," a woman shrieked and scrambled out of the pool, slipping on a wet Dorito. Someone had crushed into the pavement. A few guys immediately grabbed their towels and hustled toward the exit, muttering about infections. Even Evelyn's confident demeanor wavered as she watched her perfect HO-sponsored event fall apart in real time. I didn't wait for her to recover. I turned to her, speaking just loud enough for the remaining crowd to hear. "You said I should have read the fine print. Funny. Because I did." I smiled, the kind of smile that made people nervous. "See, I'm the state water commissioner." The murmur that rippled through the party was delicious. Some people turned to each other in alarm. Others stared at me. Realization dawning on their faces. Evelyn tried to brush it off, laughing nervously. "Oh, well, you illegally altered private property designation without state approval." I continued, my voice calm but firm. "Not only that, but you knowingly exposed 100 people to untested, non-regulated water. I have half a mind to report this to the health department right now." Evelyn's face drained of color. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. "You have no idea what you just started then. Without waiting for her to respond, I walked inside and locked my doors, leaving her standing there stunned, speechless, and for the first time, very worried. Evelyn's arrogance had been her greatest weapon in the HOA. But now for the first time I had seen it flicker that brief moment of doubt, out the realization that she had crossed the wrong person was exactly what I needed. I spent the next morning at my desk, sipping coffee, and meticulously drafting a complaint. Not an angry email, not a strongly worded letter, but an official state filing, the kind that came with a case number, an investigation, and the kind of bureaucratic nightmare Evelyn wouldn't be able to ignore. The HOA had classified my pool as a community amenity without state approval, which, considering I was the one in charge of overseeing water regulations, meant I could weaponize an entire system against her without breaking a sweat. An hour later I had forwarded the complaint to the Department of Public Health, the state environmental agency, and for good measure the tax office, just in case she had misallocated HOA fund. Then I leaned back in my chair and waited. I didn't have to wait long. By noon, an emergency HOA meeting had been scheduled. I made sure to be there early. The meeting was held in the neighborhood clubhouse, a painfully beige building that smelled like cheap air fresheners and resentment. Evelyn sat at the front, her usual smug confidence on display, but I could see the tightness in her jaw. The board members sat beside her, mostly nodding along as she explained that a certain resident was attempting to create unnecessary conflict. When I walked in, conversations stopped. Homeowners exchanged glances. Some curious, others annoyed, but a few I noticed were starting to look at Evelyn with suspicion. That was good. That meant I wasn't the only one who saw through her act. I took a seat near the back and listened as she launched into a speech about neighborhood harmony and working together for the good of the community. She was trying to downplay everything, pretending this was just a minor disagreement instead of an absolute disaster of her own making. I let her talk. I let her feel in control. And then, right when she was at the height of her performance, I stood up. Evelyn hesitated, annoyed by the interruption but clearly knowing she couldn't ignore me. "Jake," she said, forcing a smile, "do you have something to add?" I nodded, pulling out a folder. "Actually, I do. Since you made my private property a public pool, I took the liberty of sending some paperwork to the relevant agencies." I flipped open a document and held it up. "Starting today, my pool is officially declared a hazardous site due to unregulated public use, which means it is legally closed until further notice." The room erupted. Homeowners turned to each other in confusion, and a few immediately started complaining about how they had already promised their kids another weekend at the pool. Evelyn's smile flickered just for a second before she forced it back into place. "This is ridiculous," she said, laughing slightly. "You don't have the authority to do that." I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. "Evelyn, what's my job again?" she faltered. I let the silence stretch, watching as the realization settled into the room. Then, before she could recover, I flipped to another page. "Oh, and since the WHO classified my pool as a community, I also sent the property reclassification to the county assessor's office. Since it's now considered public property, that means the HOA is now financially responsible for all maintenance, repairs, and liability insurance." Evelyn's face drained of color. Someone in the crowd gasped. A man in the front row turned to his wife and whispered something urgently. That was when the first wave of panic hit. "What does that mean for our HOA fees?" a woman called out. I shrugged. "Well, considering the cost of maintaining a public pool is pretty steep, I'd imagine your HOA dues are about to go way up." The grumbling turned into outright chaos. People started shouting, some demanding answers, others turning directly to Evelyn, who was still struggling to compose herself. I watched as she gritted her teeth, then forced another smile. "This is just a misunderstanding," she said, her voice a little higher pitched than before. "We will handle it internally." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, good. Because there's one more thing. Since the pool was used for a public event without proper permits, the Department of Public Health is launching an investigation into HOA practices. That means health inspectors will be visiting not just my property, but all common areas under HOA management." The explosion of outrage was immediate. Evelyn's carefully constructed authority shattered in an instant. Homeowners who had blindly followed her leadership were now realizing they had been dragged into something far bigger than they had signed up for. People turned on each other, accusations flying, and I just stood there watching, arms crossed, enjoying the show. Evelyn tried to regain control, but she was losing fast. Someone in the back shouted that they wanted to see the HOA's financial record. Another person demanded a refund for the increased fees. The board members started whispering amongst themselves, looking uncomfortable. Evelyn, desperate, slammed her hand on the table. Enough, she snapped. This meeting is adjourned. We will resolve this privately. I laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. Oh, Evelyn. Nothing about this is private anymore. I turned toward the crowd. I'd recommend checking your HOA agreements carefully. You might be surprised what else you've been paying for with that. I walked out, leaving Evelyn to deal with the mess she had made. By the time I reached my house, I already had 2 emails from state offices confirming the investigations were underway. I poured myself a drink, stepped onto my deck, and looked at my now empty, murky pool. It was only a matter of time before Evelyn realized she had made the biggest mistake of her life, and I was going to enjoy every second of watching her empire crumble. The fallout came faster than I expected. By the next morning, my inbox was flooded with messages from neighbors, some apologizing, others furious, not at me, but at Evelyn. The HOA board had gone into full crisis mode, trying to spin the situation, but the damage was already done. The county assessor's office was reviewing the sudden reclassification of my pool. The health department had scheduled an inspection for the HOA's common areas, and state auditors had been made aware of financial irregularities. It was a perfect storm of bureaucratic nightmares, and Evelyn was at the center of it. I had barely finished my first cup of coffee when I saw Evelyn herself marching up my driveway, her heels clicking furiously against the pavement. She didn't bother knocking. Instead, she stood at the threshold of my front porch, arms crossed, glaring at me like I had personally set her house on fire. "We need to talk," she said through gritted teeth. I took a slow sip of my coffee before answering. "Do we?" Evelyn inhaled sharply, clearly trying to keep her temper in check. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but this has to stop now." I leaned against the doorframe, tilting my head slightly. "You mean enforcing the law? Holding the HOA accountable? That's my job, Evelyn." Her jaw clenched. "You know? Damn well. This isn't about regulations. This is about you trying to make a point." I smiled. "Oh, I think the point's been made loud and clear." Evelyn's frustration bubbled over her face, turning red. "You have no idea what kind of mess you've made. People are panicking. The board is in chaos. Home values are at risk." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean your control over them is slippy?" She scoffed, shaking her head in disbelief. "You really think you've won, don't you? You think you can just pull a few strings, make a few calls, and get rid of me?" I took another sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch between us. Then I shrugged. Yeah, for the first time since I had met her, Evelyn looked genuinely rattled. She had built her power in this neighborhood on intimidation and manipulation, and for years no one had dared challenge her. But she had made the mistake of assuming I was just another homeowner she could push around. She had underestimated me, and now she was realizing that there was nothing she could do to stop what was coming. The sound of a car pulling up distracted us both. We turned just in time to see 2 men in suits stepping out of a black sedan. One of them carried a clipboard. The other had a badge clipped to his belt. "Evelyn paled state auditors," I said casually, nodding toward them right on time. Evelyn's hands clenched into fists. She looked at me one last time, her eyes full of unfiltered rage, then turned on her heel and stormed back down the driveway without another word. I watched as the auditors approached her, introducing themselves with firm handshakes and professional smiles. Evelyn barely managed to polite nod before they started questioning her about the HOA's financial records. I closed the door, a satisfied smirk playing on my lips. It wasn't over yet, but the walls were closing in around her, and she knew it. Over the next few days, things unraveled even faster than I had anticipated. The health department's inspection uncovered multiple violations in the HOA's common areas, including unsafe playground equipment, improperly maintained walkways, and a clubhouse bathroom that, according to the inspector, should have been condemned years ago. Residents were outraged, realizing that the fees they had been paying for maintenance had apparently not been used for maintenance at all. The financial audit was even worse. It turned out Evelyn had been pocketing thousands in unauthorized administrative fees, overcharging residents for services that were either never performed or dramatically inflated in cost. The more the auditors dug, the more they found. And within a week, Evelyn's once loyal supporters had turned against her completely. At the next emergency meeting, Evelyn tried to defend herself, insisting that everything had been done in the best interest of the community, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. The board had no choice but to remove her from her position, And within days, legal action was being discussed. The HOA was in shambles, and for the first time the residents realized they had a choice. They could either elect new leadership and try to salvage what was left of the organization, or they could dissolve it entirely. I already knew what I wanted. I had no interest in replacing Evelyn. The problem wasn't just her. It was the entire system that gave people like her power in the first place. And so I did what I should have done from the very beginning. I filed a petition to dissolve the HOA altogether. At first, some residents resisted the idea. They had been conditioned to believe that an HOA was necessary, that without it the neighborhood would fall apart. But as the truth about Evelyn's corruption spread more and more, people began to see things differently. They realized that the HOA had done nothing but make their lives more complicated, that the promises of increased property values were just a smokescreen for unnecessary rules and fees. The vote was held 2 weeks later. It wasn't even close. The HOA was officially expanded, and for the first time in decades, homeowners were free from its control. Evelyn, unsurprisingly, did not take the news well. She tried to fight it, threatening legal action. But without the backing of the board, she had no real power left. And when the final audit results came in, revealing even more financial misconduct, she had bigger problems to deal with. She was facing heavy fines, potential criminal charges, and worst of all, complete and utter humiliation. Her house went up for sale a month later. Rumor had it, she was moving to another state, trying to start over somewhere new. I didn't care enough to find out the details. I was too busy enjoying my newfound peace with the HOA gone. I finally got to use my pool again. No random parties, no entitled neighbors treating my backyard like a public par, just me, a cold drink, and the satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served a few weeks after everything settled down. My best friend called me up and told me he had just bought a new house. When I asked where, he laughed and said, "Right next door to you." I nearly dropped my drink. "You're kidding." "Nope," he said. "Evelyn's old place, figured I'd move in. Keep an eye on things, maybe turn it into an Airbnb." I shook my head, chuckling. "You're unbelievable." "Hey," he said, "at least I won't try to claim your pool." I laughed for the first time since this whole ordeal began. I felt completely at ease. The nightmare was over, and I had come out on top. As I leaned back in my chair, staring up at the clear blue sky, I realized something. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just winning, it's making sure the people who tried to screw you over know without a doubt that they never stood a chance. If you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel.